Ambassador, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, as always.
Rule of law, independence of the judiciary and the public prosecution office is something that remains as a great, I would say, one of the greatest problems for this society and a source of huge frustration for the public. And without seeing any signs of improvement, or I would say light at the end of the tunnel, European Union peer review mission of the work of the Judicial Council is now seen as maybe a possible tool to change the things for the better. So I would ask you, what is the status of this mission, the report, and whether and when this report is going to be made public, and what can we expect? What are going to be the conclusions of this mission?
Maybe let's start with the rule of law, and then I'll come to the judicial peer review mission. The rule of law, we are gravely concerned at the situation regarding the rule of law. We, of course, follow extremely closely. Those concerns, in the case of the Judicial Council, triggered us to deploy this peer review mission. But although the peer review mission's scope is focused on the Judicial Council and was triggered by the events of last summer, which raised questions about the independence, integrity and professionalism of the Judicial Council, our concerns are much wider about the judiciary, about the prosecution, about the court system. You may ask, why are we concerned by those issues? And the answer to that is this: as a candidate country, a country which wants to join the European Union, it's absolutely critical that it advances on the rule of law. The European Union is, one of its founding principles is respect for the rule of law, but it goes beyond that. EU member states operate on a basis of trust of each other, trust that the rule of law will be enforced in the member states. Because if it's not, you will not have businesses investing, you will not have increased trade, you will not have workers from different countries traveling there. And that in itself would undermine not only the single market, but also confidence in the collaboration across the European Union. So it would be corrosive. So for a country wanting to join the European Union, it's essential that it puts in place these reforms of the rule of law. No shortcuts, no compromises, and that's why we follow it at every single step of the place, or every single step of the way. Now, turning to the review mission. The mission itself, I think, had very extensive meetings with all of the counterparts. It's now gone back to Brussels. It will be preparing conclusions and recommendations, and we'll be discussing those with the European Commission, and the Commission will decide what the next steps are. It would be wrong for me to try and preempt the outcome of those recommendations and conclusions. What I can say is they left with a very clear idea of where the problems are. Is it enough that there is a peer review mission to make sure that things really improve? No, of course not. There will be recommendations. Hopefully they're very helpful and they point the way forward. But in order for change to happen, what needs to happen is that the authorities, the judges, the prosecution, all of the different people concerned in the rule of law, and in the case of the Judicial Council, those in the Judicial Council really do the necessary to bring about reforms and stand up to attempts to interfere in justice, either from political parties or from financial interests.
If we were to preempt, or let's say guess, would one of the recommendations possibly be the dissolution of the current Judicial Council?
Well, I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to preempt or guess or any other word the conclusions. I think we need to look forward to seeing what they have to say in the way forward. But I think it was a very serious mission conducted in a very serious manner.
You say rule of law is one of the most important things for any aspirant country, especially a country that is starting negotiations. And there are many critics, I would say, saying that European Union had a bit mild reaction following the changes of the criminal code that happened just 1 month ago. What is your answer to the critics, and whether losing lots of cases involving former high-level officials due to these law changes can jeopardize EU accession process of the country in short terms, even if North Macedonia somehow manages to amend the constitution. I'm asking you this because we've seen that some of the member states, let's say like Holland, has made its objections very clearly to the government.
Well, I don't think the response was mild. I think it was extremely clear. And by the way, the response was delivered from Brussels to show the seriousness and the importance they attach to this. And the messages were, first of all, on the way in which this law was changed. It criticised the use of the EU flag, which means that you use a shortened procedure. In situations like this, where you have changes to the law which have potentially important implications for impunity, it's important that there is a public debate and the opportunity to have real scrutiny of legislation. So the first thing that the Commission said was the use of the EU flag in this context was not right. Secondly, it looked at the substance and it expressed its concern at the risk that as a result of these changes, a large number of cases of high-level corruption, there may in fact be impunity for those individuals. Of course, what we need to do now is follow closely the different cases as they go through the courts to see if in fact this turns out to be the case. But the concern, and the very real concern, is there. And again, the Commission underlined the importance that in cases of high-level corruption, there need to be in place effective sanctions which are proportionate and dissuasive in this kind of context. And it said that we will continue to follow this extremely closely in the coming months and time ahead. So the answer to your question is this is part of the overall picture of the rule of law. We are following it extremely closely. We are concerned. We continue to analyse the impact of these measures, and we will continue to follow it for the future.
And let's say, what if happens that there are some cases of impunity?
Well, if there are cases of impunity as a result of it, of course, those are issues that we will have to comment on and discuss with the authorities and to raise our concerns. And it will be for the Commission and the Member States to evaluate the overall impact of these laws. Of course, the next steps we're looking forward to now is moving forward in the accession process, seeing a roadmap in particular on the rule of law, and I imagine that these are the kind of issues that should be included there, but that's a matter for the member states to determine. But as I said, no shortcuts or compromises.
Are you aware of any trade-offs, amnesty for support for constitutional changes? Because the opposition is saying very vocally that there is play going on in the background, behind the curtains, between the former Prime Minister and the ruling coalition.
I've seen lots of speculation about this in the public domain. I don't want to add to that speculation or comment on, domestic political developments.
When we are on the subject of constitutional changes, how do you see the stance of the opposition? Because it seems that they have even dug deeper in their trenches, saying that they won't vote for any kind of constitutional amendments under Bulgarian dictation.
I think on the constitutional amendments, it's really important to step back and look at a couple of factors. First of all, the wider context in Europe at the moment. We are living through an extraordinary, tragic and historic time as a result of Russia's war in Ukraine. And one of the results of this is that it has lent a kind of intensity to the discussion on enlargement, as member states and as many involved are seeing that enlargement is not just about prosperity and democratic values, which are of course very important. It's also about stability and security. And so you've seen a real, I think, intensification, a new momentum in the enlargement process, witnessed by the extraordinary decision to offer candidate status to Ukraine, to Moldova, to Bosnia, the opening of accession negotiations with North Macedonia and with Albania, and other steps. And more recently, you see the debate becoming quite deep and quite intensive concerning reform of the European Union in order to prepare for enlargement, possible dates, etc. So all of this, I think, is showing that there is a momentum and there is a seriousness. And for us, what we want is to see North Macedonia able to benefit from this opportunity and to move forward decisively on its enlargement path. Now, concerning the constitutional changes themselves, the first thing I would say, of course, this is part of the deal that was reached in July 2022. That agreement provided an opportunity an opportunity for this country to move forward at last. And so we've seen the screening process, etc., and a number of activities which have taken place since then. The next step does indeed depend on changing the constitution, but that's a matter entirely for this country. It's a decision for you to take. No one is going to, no further decision is needed from the EU side, no further steps are required from the EU side. If that step is taken, then we move directly to the next step in the process of enlargement. Last of all, on the proposals themselves, of course, it's a sovereign decision for this country to make, but changing the constitution to include people who self-identify as Bulgarian within the constitution would seem to strengthen what is already a good record on inter-ethnic relations.
Do you fear that if this momentum in the European Union, because of the geopolitical situation, is not grasped by North Macedonia, but the Macedonian society, that maybe EU train will leave the station on some terms in some period for Macedonia?
I don't think it's just me. I think there's been a number of visitors to Skopje who've come in order to try and explain these developments in the European Union and the wider picture, and to explain that the opportunity now exists and that there is momentum. Momentum, as you know, in politics and in diplomatic international relations is a rare thing, and they're calling really to seize on that momentum and to make the most of it so that you don't miss this opportunity.
Vice President of VMRO-DPMNE Alexander Nikolsky has stated, that I'm quoting, that while foreign politicians who come to Skopje and exert pressure for constitutional changes are in fact pressing for ethnic Macedonians to accept that they have Bulgarian history and language with Bulgarian origin, and they should go to Sofia at least to ask leadership over there to implement some of the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. How do you comment these statements, having in mind that they are coming from the largest opposition party?
No, I've seen many of the visitors that have come here. They're coming as friends. They're not coming here to pressure or force the country into anything, but coming as friends to, on the one hand, as I've said, to explain the broader political context and the opportunity that now exists, and also to listen, and also to share their views and their experience of their own enlargement process. Concerning issues around identity and culture, no one loses their identity on the way to the European Union. That's the experience of all of those member states that have joined. In fact, on the contrary, what you've seen is a result of joining the European Union. The country itself becomes stronger, and so does its culture and its identity and its understanding of its own history. So none of those issues, in my view, are at stake. Regarding language, part of the agreement from July 2022 is that the Macedonian language is the language that will be used within the negotiating framework, within the negotiations themselves. EU legislation will be translated into Macedonian. And we've already seen with the Frontex agreement that there is an agreement signed in Macedonian together with other EU languages, all treated as equal. And so I think what you've seen is a reinforcement of the Macedonian language. If you ask me who is the strongest proponent of Macedonian in this country, my answer would be the EU delegation. The EU delegation has promoted the work of great Macedonian writers such as Aco Shopov, Goran Stefanovski, Kočoraci. We've also funded the translation of some 420 works of European literature into Macedonian. We also support the Babylon Award, which is an award which has been running now for 10 years, which is an award for the best translation into Macedonian from different works of European literature. So again, I think it's about the way in which the process can reinforce the identity, the language and the culture of the country.
How do you address fears, let's say, among opposition politicians when you speak to them, having in mind the same things that you said now about Macedonian language and about Macedonian history and culture?
I think it's very much like the visitors to Skopje. They came with a spirit also wanting to provide reassurance on all of these issues, and certainly in the discussions I have, not just with opposition members of parliament or politicians, I also travel across the country and meet people in many different towns. We have these very nice events where we literally have a town hall meeting in a cafe, talk to citizens, and I share these views with them. And they, of course, they take their own view on that. But I think I can share that clear perception that on the way to the European Union, I think you see the country as a whole strengthened, including its identity and its sense of itself.
There's a lot of talk about this new EU dynamics, especially in the part of the enlargement that has begun with the Russian aggression of Ukraine. And now we are talking about very concrete dates, 2030. And this is very interesting because there's a specific dates, but so far we've seen a lot of promises on EU side. I would say it failed, and there were a lot. Do you think that this date, 2030, is really realistic?
The person who most recently mentioned the 2030 was the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, speaking in Bled. And I think what he was doing there, he was clear. He was saying, he was describing, as I have, the overall context and the intensification of discussions on enlargement, the seriousness with which we are now approaching this. But at the same time, he was saying there is an opportunity here. 2030 is a date which is an opportunity that you could perhaps seize in order to join by that. It was his own view on that, but he was saying this was a chance. Whether or not that happens doesn't depend so much on the European Union. It depends very much on the dynamics here. And for that, I think a number of things need to be in place. But the most important thing is that politicians from across the political divide, and indeed people from different parts of the administration and from the institutions, come together on a kind of national, treating this as a kind of national project, so that reforms of the reforms in line with the EU standards are really the key priority in the coming years. If that is done, if they work together, not necessarily in coalition, they can be in opposition, but if they agree on these core reforms and push forward in a determined manner, then it can be achieved. It's exactly what Croatia did. Croatia, in its enlargement process, there were different changes of government, there were strong political differences, but on the core issues there was agreement. They managed to achieve that, they joined the European Union, and that same determination has shown through as they've now moved to the Euro and also to the Schengen area.
So you think that, because you know the situation in the country and the society, you think that now it's 2023, that 2030, if there is a consensus on EU membership, North Macedonia can reach that goal?
It is all in the hands, really, of the leadership and people involved in decision making.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.